guys, Blue here, and we're going to show you Noah's updated deck list. So, Noah's deck, the way we built it, combined his first deck, the 7 Turns of Creation, which he used against Kaiba, with his Spirit deck that he used against Yugi once Yugi took over. Because each deck, especially the 7 Turns deck, there weren't really enough cards to build either one individually successfully. And again, we'd rather not just, throw a lot of random cards in there in a case like this where we could combine them. And even though at times the deck can be a little bit disjointed because of the 2 running themes, it also can't hold itself together better because of the breakdown of monsters and spells that are more useful between the 2 types. So I'll go through the deck and I'll talk about a couple things, that we changed, because Noah's deck has changed a few times since the original one. So first card up from the 7 Turns part, Giant Soldier of Stone, 3 of them. We went with 3 because Noah's deck was difficult to build. Of course, using his cards and making it, work. Because the problem was Noah's deck, like so many other characters, it had trouble sometimes. Just because of, again, the way his monsters actually perform versus how they're portrayed in the anime. So we went with 3 Giant Soldier of Stone to give him the defense he needs to protect himself and to summon some of his tributes. It's not the strongest balance between quantities as far as played or, cards that were played more, played less. But, the ratios are actually really to help him and his deck work. And that's why we've kept changing it, is to find a way that makes it balanced and somewhat accurate, but also still, be able to an extent, hold its own. Alright, so 3 Giant Soldier of Stone, 2 Gradius, again from the 7 Turns deck, because his whole theme right there was to kind of sum up the world. So we went from dinosaurs and mammoths to centaur and the stone soldier, and also Gradius being this futury cyber techy fly thing. His last normal monster, Sabersaurus. So not one he played. He played Giant Rex, which is not printed in the TCG. So we wanted to substitute that with a versatile dinosaur monster instead of just something random. We wanted its stats are similar. Giant Rex had 2,000 attack, I believe. But the point is, we wanted to make sure that that dinosaur card was represented with something that would be helpful to him. So we used Sabersaurus, but it's one of our decisions that's not a card he played, but we use it in place of. Next, 2 Asura Priests. So spirit monsters have their fatal flaw that they return to the hand at the end of the turn. Can sometimes be a useful strategy for the ones especially that have an effect when they're summoned, or ones that are weaker that can be protected by not being on the field, but also, can be a disadvantage if you're only monster spirits. Now granted, there is Spiritual Energy Settle Machine, but that does have its own cost, as opposed to monsters that just don't have that spirit effect. But anyway, so Asura Priest, 2 copies, again, to help him, get an edge to fight. And if you don't know, her effect is that she can attack every monster on your opponent's field once each, but she cannot attack directly. Big Tusk Mammoth. Again, not a card he used, but it's in place of the Mammoth card he did have, again, for his 7 turns of creation deck, which did slowly go through the ages of the Earth. So, again, that was represented through Big Tusk Mammoth, just as it's, kind of a placeholder. So, next up, 2, Chiron the Mage. Again, from the 7 turns deck, has that more medieval feel with a centaur, fictional character. But sure. One of the better monsters in his deck because it gives him his spell and trap removal. And then 1800 attack is something that, of course, comes in handy as well. 1 copy, Gradius' option. So it's not a very good card because you have to have a Gradius on the field to summon it, and then it gets the stats of said Gradius. And if Gradius is destroyed, so is Gradius' option. The best you get is that it does count as a special summon. So you can special summon and drop it if you have Gradius. Either as a second summon that turn with Gradius, or the turn after you summon Gradius, you can special it, and then tribute them both, maybe. And it copies the attack of Gradius. So if Gradius has Cyclone Laser, then you'll have 2 Gradiuses with 1500 attack, but only 1 with the piercing effect. But overall, it's just really not that good. And it's probably that little Gradius archetype that Konami came up with. It's like 3 cards. So, Spirits. Great Long Nose. Yeah, so you tribute a monster for it, and it still only has 1900 attack, which we know we can already get anyway with 4 stars. But the catch is that if you can inflict damage, your opponent has to skip the next battle phase. So that can definitely buy you a turn if you need it. Next up, one of his trumps, Hino Kagu Suchi. So it's a 8-star spirit. So without, Settle Machine, he does return to your hand after it costs you 2 monsters. But again, the higher level spirits definitely have great effects. And his is that if he inflicts battle damage, your opponent has to discard their entire hand on their next turn before their draw phase. So ultimately, you leave them with their 1 card that they draw. And, that's really something that'll help you out. A Naba White Rabbit can attack directly. So a very, very familiar effect we see all across the card game in various monsters and archetypes. Alright, next up, Orihime. 2 copies. So, 0 attack and 100 defense makes it terrible in battle, of course, but her effect is that when she's summoned or flipped face up, you can change the battle position of 1 face-up monster on your opponent's field. So, that can be helpful, but, assuming you have something else to attack your opponent with, because again, she won't do anything with that 0 attack. So, it works like a stop defense or block attack, but really only in combination with something else, because she has no stats. Yamata Dragon. So 7-star spirit. So again, 2 tributes, and if you don't have Settled Machine, it's back in your hand and you're out a boss monster. But really great effect that when it inflicts battle damage, the inverse of Kagusuchi, which makes your opponent discard, you get the draw till you have 5 cards in your hand. So it adds to Noah's deck as a draw effect, and again, that 2600, it can definitely do damage. That is also enough to get over Dark Magician in Yuki's deck. Still can't touch Blue Eyes, but that's alright. That's what the boss is for. So, last effect monster, Yatagarasu. The infamous, forever banned Yatagarasu, Why? Because when it inflicts battle damage, your opponent skips their draw phase. And if you played this in a certain Yatagarasu lock with Chaos Emperor Dragon, you would set up that your opponent had no hand, could not draw, and had to forfeit the duel and rage quit because, well, it's kind of a dick move. But anyway, so yeah, that's its effect. Your opponent skips their draw phase. And if you ever can be in a position where you can do that damage to skip their draw phase and they can't come back from it, they have nothing in their hand to stop you, and you can repeat it, it's game over. But that usually doesn't happen with the anime duels just because, someone has something. Alright, so last monster is the big bad Shinado, King of a Higher Plane. So, this was Noah's Deckmaster that came out of Shinado's arc. Very different effect in the anime. In the anime, when it inflicted damage to your opponent, you gain that as life points. Also, if it had a defense position monster, it cut your opponent's life points in half. That's kind of ridiculous. Life point gain effect between Shinado and Shinado's arc gave Noah a lot of extra life points, which posed a challenge to Yugi, and hence Yugi's final blow with Blue Eyes Ultimate defusing to the 3 blue eyes to beat Noah, because that was a lot of damage and Yugi needed it. And that's one thing our version of Noah's deck fails at, is that it does lack that life point gain engine. But it does a good job, otherwise. So, that's anime Shinado. We did not errata Shinado. Its own fight is fine, and in some ways a little bit stronger in that when it destroys a monster, your opponent takes damage equal to the monster's attack. So anything they have in attack position, they're taking the full 3,300. First off, the difference between 33 and the monster's attack, and then the monster's attack. And if it's in defense mode, it'll be the same thing with just the damage. So even in defense mode, your opponent is not safe from Shinado. And, unless they have a way to clear it out, it can end the duel really quickly. So, on to the spell cards. Change of Heart. Cyclone Laser. So, as I mentioned, only equip it to Gradius, increase the attack by 300, and inflict piercing damage. So, you end up with a 1,500 attack Gradius with piercing. Yeah. Probably not going to do that much for you. Again, it can have its moments. But, let's be real. It's Gradius. Dark Hole. 2 Dark Holes. Okay, so here's an interesting thing. Noah had 1 Dark Hole. We don't like to duplicate cards like Dark Hole, Heavy Storm, Harpy's Feather Duster, because they're really good cards, obviously. However, in Noah's 7 Turns of Creation deck, he played 2 other cards, one of which was, I think, Giant Flood. I don't remember the names now. But he played 2 other cards which did what Dark Hole does, but had extra effects. One also destroyed monsters in both players' hands. One had both players' life points. So we have 1 Dark Hole, and then a second Dark Hole to replace one of the 2 cards, which were Dark Hole and then some. So, because we're not going to replace all 3 with 3 Dark Holes. That, we think, is a little bit much for anime games. But, so that's how we broke it down. So, 2 Dark Holes. It was 1 originally, and we reevaluated it, and it's 2. And this is probably the only time we're ever going to build a character with more than 1 Dark Hole. 2 Fissure. 2 Pod Greed. This also really helps Noah kind of get ahead and get a leg up in a duel if he needs it. 1 Sebek's Blessing. So this is one of his few life point gain cards we actually do have. Savic's Blessing, a potentially great card that you gain life points equal to the damage you inflict, just like Shinato's anime effect, except it only applies to direct damage. So you're less likely to pull this card off if you do, there's potentially a major life point bonus involved. But at the same time, if you've inflicted, say, 3,300 damage to your opponent, you'll gain that back, but what does that mean with life points? If you're up 3,300, your opponent's down 3,300, depending on where you are in that game, it may not matter how much life points you have because it's going to be over anyway. But anyway, that's an aside. Shinato's arc in 3. Because like a lot of the characters that we have from the virtual world, the big 5, Tristan's virtual world deck, and the new Serenity and Taya decks, they all have the deck masters in triplicate. Because those characters, A, needed to have enough cards for 40, unlike Yuki, Kaiba, Joey, which had less of an issue. B, the big 5 revolved around the deck masters. They were their deck masters. Unlike the heroes who had them as an offshoot monster, the big 5 were their own, monsters. So Shinato's arc and Shinato are both in triplicate because they were both the deck master, and unlike the Perfect Machine King, which was a fusion with Robotic Knight, Shinato's arc directly leads to Shinato. Obviously, it's a ritual. Anyway, and the Shinato's arc deck master effect, which we definitely have, of course, not applied to this deck at all because it's kind of ridiculous, is that when a monster is destroyed on other player's field, you equip it to the arc. This does not count towards your spell and trap card zone. If you have no monsters, you can special summon the monsters equipped from the arc, equal to the monsters your opponent has in attack position. So basically, it's similar to, say, a Scapegoat, in that it creates a defensive barrier, but you only get enough monsters equal to the opponent's attack position monsters. So you get enough to absorb their attacks. You don't get to swarm your whole field and then make tributes and whatnot. And then you can, banish them for life points. So the Shinato's arc has this ridiculous effect, based off a ritual spell card that says tribute monsters with 8 or more stars, summon Shinato, blah blah blah. So like many of the big 5's deck masters, they have nothing to do with the actual card. They made up something completely ridiculous, like Reflector Hole or Final Artillery, Clear the Courtroom, that really gave them a strong edge. And of course, almost every time the hero still won anyway. So 3 Shinato's arc that just lets you summon Shinato. Nothing else. Nothing, crazy. So 2 Spiritual Energy Settle Machine. Keeps your spirits grounded on the field. You have to discard a card as a maintenance cost at the end of your turn. So not really that bad. But if it's removed from the field, so are all the spirits immediately. And yeah, we have 2 copies because it will help, with the spirits. Although usually we don't care to activate it, partly because the cost, also because there's not always as much of a need to, just sometimes. But it's not a card we tend to like to play, or we care to play. We usually work around it anyway because we're working on other strategies, but it's there. And we didn't go with 3 just because of, if you have 1, you don't need any more. And because of the way the spirits are, there's not a need to always have that card present. 1 copy, Spring of Rebirth. Yes, it does give you life points when spirits are returned. But with, of course, Settle Machine, that will negate Spring of Rebirth's effect. So it's 1 copy because it's not the most overall functional card. And because we do have some range of play with the quantities known as deck, we'd have to make everything triplicate. Unlike if we decide to split the decks. Although the 7 turns deck really would not stand on its own. 2 Earthshaker. Very interesting card. You pick 2 attributes. Your opponent picks 1 and destroys all monsters on their field with that attribute. So, I mean, aside from any counter cards, you will destroy an opponent's monster. They get to pick which one. But you will get something out of it. The issue with this card that we've seen and why it fails is with the Yugi Kaiba or just Kaiba. They have a fairly good amount of earths and darks and some lights. So, quite often, Yugi / Kaiba, or just Kaiba, could amass a very strong field using only 1 attribute. Or it's any attribute plus Vampire Lord, and he'll come back. So, I'm not saying it's a terrible card. It's a really good card. But in actual gameplay, we've seen it fail just because of the way the decks are and that they lack the variety of attributes. Also, in that it is easy to play around with these decks, with Yugi Kaiba decks. Last card, Pyro Clock of Destiny, and Noah played this against Yugi because of swords. So, unfortunately, we've had this in the deck the entire time, only at 1 copy, but unless he's playing against Yugi or the Yugi Kaiba combined deck, it has no purpose. So, you know, maybe it's something in the future we see dropped if more of Noah's cards are ever printed. You know, personally, I'd love a Virtual World base pack to come out. We know it's not everyone's favorite story arc, but there's still a lot of cool cards that we saw I'd like to see more of. So Nesbitt's Machines, Crump's Penguins, Ganzu's Reptiles. I mean, every character had, you know, cards that, you know, had something about them that at least I thought was pretty cool as far as, you know, either appearance or effects. But anyway, so that's Noah's deck profile. And at this point, we have redone the Big Five. We have modified Tristan's previously labeled hybrid deck into a more refined, closer to Virtual World. So he is now part of the Virtual World slate, although he was not part of this debut. He is listed under Virtual World. Now, this was the updated Noah deck that we are very happy with, that still has a great Noah feel to it, but plays a little bit smoother, a little bit more aggressively with the new decks, because again, Yugi Kaiba can play very aggressively. So this definitely helps him keep pace, and it makes for a much better match. The next deck profile and the last video that pertains to the whole Virtual World release plus the add-ons that we've been doing with these deck profiles. The last video is going to be the Yugi Kaiba Virtual World Hybrid from the Yugi / Kaiba versus Noah duel. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It was amazing. So that'll be the last thing. The very next video after that one will be the first duel of the tournament you guys have been waiting for. The last time we had a tournament was a year ago in November. So this will be similar. 16 players, single round elimination. We'll see who wins. See you guys.